Why, hello there. Hello. What you doing? You watching my stream? You enjoying my music? Hi, hi, Minnie. Hi, hello, everybody. Hello. Archibald. You sitting on my lap? You enjoying the scritches? Staggering, Minnie. Staggering that you're here. I am staggered. Yes, hi, I'm back. I'm ready to read more book. Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and the other guy. So currently we're 27% through the book. I think I shall try to get up to the halfway point today. I am late today because 1, I am sleepy, and 2, because I am now full of soup, and thus it is difficult. Archibald is still kind of listless today. The poor guy, maybe he's just tired from the antibiotic. I don't know. We'll find out soon enough when we take him to the vet, I guess. But still, you know, he's been doing so good for the past couple weeks, and now he's kind of relapsed a little bit. Doofus. Soup sleepy me and sleepier Archie. Yeah, he's a baby. He's my baby. You gonna listen to me read the book, Archibald? Are you gonna listen to me read the book? Do you want to hear about the Antichrist? Do you want to hear about Satan? Do. Archibaldo, do you want to know about the devil? Do you want to know Satan? Da 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 da. Anyway, let us get to the reading now. Yeah. You'd had that as a quote. You know what you do, Minnie. Da 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 da. Archie. Da 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 da. Earlier when I fired up my virtual machine for that music generator thingy, for some reason the first time around it glitched out, and then every time I moved my mouse it made this infernal screaming sound. I don't know what that was all about, but it stopped now, so... Do not touch my phone, Archie. I know it is super cool to be on camera, but don't drop it, okay? Hiccup. Cursed virtual machines, yes. Ghosts in the machine happened, or something. Archibald. Be okay, Archibald, okay? Be okay. Alrighty then, so, we are... We are somewhere in the book. Honestly, I don't know if I care to recount it. What happened last time? A bunch of things happened. They swapped out the Antichrist for some random baby, but it was a mistake. And now he just kind of lives in a normal family. He's got his hellhound and everything, but it's just a puppy, because it's just a normal family. I don't like brain right now to recall things properly. So how about I just read, and then we'll kind of like get swept into the whole thing. Get immersed into the world of Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman through the power of my mouth. Aziraphale, like many Soho merchants who specialized in hard-to-find books for the discerning connoisseur, had a back room, but was in there was far more esoteric than anything normally found inside a shrink-wrapped bag for the customer who knows what he wants. He was particularly proud of his books of prophecy, first editions usually, and every one was signed. He'd got Richard Nixon and Martha the Gypsy and Ignatius Sibylla and old Otwell Binns. Nostradamus had signed, "To mine old friend Aziraphale with the best wishes." Mother Shipton had spilled drink on his copy, and in a climate control cabinet in one corner was the original scroll in the shaky handwriting of St. John the Divine of Patmos, whose revelation had been the all-time bestseller. Aziraphale had found him a nice chap, if a bit too fond of odd mushrooms. What the collection did not have was a copy of The Nice and Accurate Prophecies of Agnes Nutter, and Aziraphale walked into the room holding it as a keen philatelist might hold the Mauritius blue that had just turned up on a postcard from his aunt. He'd never even seen a copy before, but he'd heard about it. Everyone in the trade, which, considering it was a highly specialized trade, meant about a dozen people had heard of it. Its existence was a sort of vacuum around which all sorts of strange stories had been orbiting for hundreds of years. Aziraphale realized he wasn't sure if he could orbit a vacuum, and didn't care. The Nice and Accurate Prophecies made the Hitler diaries look like, well, a bunch of forgeries. His hands hardly shook at all as he laid it down on a bench, pulled on a pair of surgical rubber gloves, and opened it reverently. Aziraphale was an angel, but he also worshipped books. The title said, "The Nice and Accurate Prophecies of Agnes Nutter," in slightly smaller type, being a certain and preface history from the present day unto the endages of this world. In slightly larger type, containing therein many diverse wonders and precepts for the wife. In a different type, more complete than ever yet before published. In smaller type but in capitals, concerning the strange times ahead. In slightly desperate italics, and events of a wonderful nature. In larger type once more, reminiscent of Nostradamus at his best, Ursula Shipton. The prophecies were numbered, and there were more than 4,000 of them. "Steady, steady," Aziraphale muttered to himself. He went into the little kitchenette and made himself some cocoa and took some deep breaths. Then he came back and read the prophecy at random. 40 minutes later, the cocoa was untouched. The red-haired woman in the corner of the hotel bar was the most successful war correspondent in the world. She now had a passport in the name of Carmine Zugiber, and she went where the wars were. Well, more or less. Actually, she went where the wars weren't. She'd already been where the wars were. She was not well known except when it counted. You get half a dozen war correspondents together in an airport bar, and the conversation will, like a compass orienting to north, swing around to Murchison of the New York Times, to Van Home of Newsweek, to Antford of ITN News. The war correspondents. But when Murchison and Van Home and Antford run into each other in a burnt-out tin shack in Beirut or Afghanistan or the Sudan, after they'd admired each other's scars and had downed a few, they would exchange odd anecdotes of Red Zugiber from the National World Weekly. "That dumb rag," Murchison would say, "it doesn't goddamn know what it's goddamn got." Actually, the Natural World Weekly did know just what it had got. It had a war correspondent. It just didn't know why or what to do with one now it had her. A typical Natural World Weekly would tell the world how Jesus' face was seen on a Big Mac bun bought by someone from Des Moines, with an artist's impression of the bun. How Elvis Presley was recently sighted working in a burger lord in Des Moines. How listening to Elvis records cured the Des Moines housewives' cancer. How the spate of werewolves infesting the Midwest are the offspring of noble pioneer women raped by Bigfoot. And that Elvis was taken by space aliens in 1976 because he was too good for this world. The footnote reads, by the way, remarkably one of these stories is indeed true. That was the National World Weekly. They sold 4 million copies a week, and they needed a war correspondent like they needed an exclusive interview with the General Secretary of the United Nations. The footnote reads as follows. The interview was done in 1983 and went as follows. Question. You're the Secretary of the United Nations, then. Answer. C. Question. Ever cited Elvis? End of footnote. So they paid Red Zugiber a great deal of money to go and find wars, and ignored the bulging, badly typed envelopes he sent them occasionally from around the globe to justify her generally fairly reasonable expenses claims. They felt justified in this because, as they saw it, she really wasn't a very good war correspondent, although she was undoubtedly the most attractive, which counted for a lot on the National World Weekly. Her war reports were always about a bunch of guys shooting at each other, with no real understanding of the wider political ramifications, and, more importantly, no human interest. Occasionally they would hand one of her stories over to a rewrite man to fix up. Jesus appeared to 9-year-old Manuel Gonzalez during a pitched battle on the Rio Concorsa, and told him to go home because his mother worried about him. "I knew it was Jesus," said the brave little child, "because he looked like he did when his picture miraculously appeared on my sandwich box." Mostly the National World Weekly left her alone, and carefully filled her stories in the rubbish bin. Murchison and Van Home and Nanforth didn't care about this. All they knew was that whenever a war broke out, Miss Zugiber was there first, practically before. "How does she do it?" they would ask each other incredulously. "How the hell does she do it?" And their eyes would meet, and silently say, "If she was a car, she'd be made by Ferrari. She's the kind of woman you expect to see as the beautiful consort to the corrupt generalissimo of a collapsing third world country. And she hangs around with guys like us. We're the lucky guys, right?" Miss Zugiber just smiled and bought another round of drinks for everybody on the National World Weekly, and watched the fights break out around her, and smiled. She had been right. Journalism suited her. Even so, everyone needs a holiday, and the Red Zugiber was on her first in 11 years. She was on a small Mediterranean island which made its money from the tourist trade, and that in itself was odd. Red looked to be the kind of woman who, if she took a holiday on any island smaller than Australia, would be doing so because she was friends with the man who owned it. And had you told any islander a month before that war was coming, he would have laughed at you and tried to sell you a raffia work wine holder or a picture of the bay done in seashells. That was then. This was now. Now a deep religio-political divide, concerning which of 4 small mainland countries they weren't actually a part of, had split the country into 3 factions, destroyed the statue of Santa Maria in the town square, and done for the tourist trade. Red Zugiber sat in the bar of the Hotel de Palomar de Sol, drinking what passed for a cocktail. In one corner a tired pianist played, and the waiter in a toupee crooned into a microphone. Once upon a time there was a little wild bull, very sad because he was a little wild bull. A man threw himself through the window, a knife between his teeth, a Kalashnikov automatic rifle in one hand, a grenade in the other. I claim this Oteg Idergenig Ogder, he paused. He took the knife out of his mouth and began again. I claim this hotel in the name of the pro-Turkish liberation faction. The last 2 holidaymakers remaining on the island climbed underneath their table. Let's see, the footnote reads for this one. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Threlfall of 9, The Elms, Paynton. They always maintained that one of the nice things about going on holiday was not having to read the newspapers or listen to the news. Just getting away from it all, really. And due to a tummy bug contracted Mr. Threlfall and Mrs. Threlfall after rather overdoing it until Sunday first day, this was their first time out their hotel room for a week and a half. Anyway, let's continue. And the footnote. Red unconcernedly withdrew the the maraschino cherry from her drink, put it to her scarlet lips, and sucked it slowly off its stick in a way that made several men in the room break into a cold sweat. The pianist stood up, reached into his piano, and pulled out a vintage submachine gun. "This hotel has already been claimed by the pro-Greek Territorial Brigade," he screamed. "Make one false move and I shoot out your living daylight." There was a motion at the door. A huge black-bearded individual with a golden smile and a genuine antique Gatling gun stood there, with a cohort of equally huge, although less impressively armed men behind him. This strategically important hotel, for years a symbol of the fascist imperialist Turco-Greek running dog tourist trade, is now the property of the Italo-Maltese freedom fighters, he boomed affably. "Now we kill everybody." "Rubbish," said the pianist. "Is not strategically important, just has extremely well-stocked wine cellar." "He's right, Pedro," said the man with the Kalashnikov. "That's why my lot wanted it. Il General Ernesto de Montoya said to me, he said, 'Fernando, the war will be over by Saturday, and the lads will be wanting a good time. Pop down to the Hotel del Palmar del Sol and claim it as booty, will you?'" The bearded man turned red. "This is bloody important strategically. Fernando Chianti. I drew a big map of the island and is right in the middle, which makes it pretty bloody strategically important, I can tell you." "Huh," said Fernando. "You might as well say that just because little Diego's house has a view of the decadent capitalist topless private beach, that it's strategically important." The pianist blushed a deep red. "Our lot got that this morning," he admitted. There was a silence. In the silence was a faint, silken rasping. Redhead uncrossed her legs. The pianist's Adam apple bobbed up and down. "Well, it's pretty strategically important," he managed, trying to ignore the woman on the bar stool. "I mean, if someone landed a submarine on it, you'd want to be somewhere you could see it all." Silence. "Well, it's a lot more strategically important than this hotel anyway," he finished. Pedro coughed ominously. "The next person who says anything at all, is dead," he grinned. Hefted his gun. "Right, now, everyone against far wall." Nobody moved. They weren't listening to him anymore. They were listening to a low, indistinct murmuring from the hallway behind them, quiet and monotonous. There was some shuffling among the cohort in the doorway. They seemed to be doing their best to stand firm, but they were being inexorably edged out of the way by the muttering, which had begun to resolve itself into audible phrases. "Don't mind me, gents. One-eyed, eh? 3 times round the island, nearly didn't find the place. Someone doesn't believe in signposts, eh? Still, found it in the end. Had to stop and ask 4 times. Finally asked the post office. They always know the post office. Had to draw me a map, though. Got it here somewhere." Sliding serenely past the men with guns, like a pike through a trout pond, came a small, bespectacled man in a blue uniform, carrying a long, thin, brown paper-wrapped parcel, tied with string. His sole concession to the climate were his open-toed brown plastic sandals, although the green woolen socks he wore underneath them showed his deep and natural distrust of foreign weather. He had a peaked cap on, with International Express written on it, in large white letters. He was unarmed, but no one touched him. No one even pointed a gun at him. They just stared. The little man looked around the room, scanning the faces, and then looking back down at his clipboard. Then he walked straight over to Red, still sitting on her bar stool. "Package for you, miss," he said. Red took it and began to untie the string. The International Express man coughed discreetly and presented the journalist with a well-thumbed receipt pad and a yellow plastic ballpoint pen attached to the clipboard by the piece of string. "You had to sign for it, miss. Just here. Print your full name over here. Signature down there." "Of course." Red signed the receipt pad, illegibly, then printed her name. The name she wrote was not Carmine Zugiber. It was a much shorter name. The man thanked her kindly and made his way out, muttering, "Lovely place you've got there, gents. Always meant to come here out on a holiday. Sorry to trouble you. Excuse me, sir." And he passed out of their lives as serenely as he had come. Red finished opening the parcel. People began to edge around to get a better look. Inside the package was a large sword. She examined it. It was a very straightforward sword, long and sharp. It looked both old and unused, and it had nothing ornamental or impressive about it. This was no magical sword, no mystic weapon of power and might. It was very obviously a sword created to slice, chop, cut, preferably kill, but, failing that, irreparably maim a very large number of people indeed. It had an indefinable aura of hatred and menace. Red clasped the hilt in her exquisitely manicured right hand and held it up to eye level. The blade glinted. "All right," she said, stepping down from the stool. "Finally." She finished the drink, hefted the sword over one shoulder, and looked around at the puzzled factions, who now encircled her completely. "Sorry to run out on you chaps," she said. "Would love to stay and get to know you better." The men in the room suddenly realized that they didn't want to know her better. She was beautiful, but she was beautiful in the way a forest fire was beautiful. Something to be admired from a distance, not up close. And she held her sword, and she smiled like a knife. There were a number of guns in that room, and slowly, tremblingly, they were focused on her chest, and her back, and her head. They encircled her completely. "Don't move," croaked Pedro. Everyone else nodded. Red shrugged. She began to walk forward. Every finger on every trigger tightened, almost of its own accord. Lead and the smell of cordite filled the air. Red's cocktail glass smashed in her hand. The room's remaining mirrors exploded in lethal shards. Part of the ceiling fell down. And then it was over. Carmine Zugiber turned and stared at the bodies surrounding her as if she hadn't the faintest idea of how they came to be there. She licked a spatter of blood, someone else's, from the back of her hand with a scarlet cat-like tongue. Then she smiled. And she walked out of the bar, her heels clicking on the tiles like the tapping of distant hammers. The two holidaymakers climbed out from under the table and surveyed the carnage. "This wouldn't have happened if we'd have gone to Torremolinos like we usually do," said one of them plaintively. "Foreigners," sighed the other. "They're just not like us, Patricia." "That settles it, then. Next year we go to Brighton," said Mrs. Trelfall, completely missing the significance of what had just happened. It meant there wouldn't be any next year. It rather lowered the odds of there being any next year week to speak of. End of chapter. This book keeps trying to make me sing something. And also read Old English. Alright. Next chapter is Thursday, but let me take a short break and drink some water and stretch and stuff. Sweaty Men and Singing More. That's... what a chapter. You're not gonna see this anywhere else except when I have to read a book. Hi, Pixie, by the way. I hope you're doing good. This book has like every chapter starts with like this flourished fancy first letter that they do. I don't remember what they're called, but I don't know why they do it because it looks kind of strange on a Kindle, but they do have them. And this one has a cat on a broom for some reason. That's fun. Hold on, let me pose this picture so you may see what it looks like. Screenshot. See? Let me get a better zoom in. Resting and recovering. Hell yeah, you did good this week. You did good. Hey, big stretch. Hey, bigger stretch. Yeah. Okay, big yawn as well. Get all my bodily functions out of the way, why don't I? Archibald, keep your paw off the power button, okay? Good man. I will move it for you, okay? Yeah, big yawn. No, come on. I just moved it. Yeah, other way. Yeah. Thank you. Let us continue our book. There was a newcomer in the village. New people were always a source of interest and speculation among them. Footnote reading. It didn't matter what the four had called their gang over the years. The frickin' name changes usually being prompted by whatever Adam had happened to have read or viewed the previous day. The Adam Young Squad, Adam and Co., the Hole in the Chalk Gang, the really well-known four, the Legion of Really Superheroes, the Quarry Gang, the Secret Four, the Justice Society of Tadfield, the Galaxatrons, the Four Just Persons, the Rebels. Everyone else always referred to them darkly as them, and eventually they did too. But this time Pepper had impressive news. She's moved into Jasmine Cottage and she's a witch, she said. I know because Mrs. Henderson does the cleaning and she told my mother she gets a witch's newspaper. She gets loads of ordinary newspapers too, but she gets this special witch's one. My father says there's no such thing as witches, said Wensleydale, who had fair, wavy hair and peered seriously out at life through the thick black-rimmed spectacles. It was widely believed that he had once been christened Jeremy, but no one ever used the name, not even his parents, who called him Youngster. They did this in the subconscious hope that he might take the hint. Wensleydale gave the impression of having been born at the mental age of 47. Don't see why not, said Brian, who had a wide, cheerful face under an apparently permanent layer of grime. I don't see why witches shouldn't have their own newspaper, with stories about all the latest spells and that. My father gets Angler's Mail, and I bet there's more witches than anglers. It's called Psychic News, volunteered Pepper. That's not witches, said Wensleydale. My aunt has that, and that's just spoon-bending and fortune-telling and people thinking they were Queen Elizabeth the first in another life. There's no witches anymore, actually. People invented medicines and told them they didn't need them anymore and started burning them. It could have been pictures of frogs and things, said Brian, who was reluctant to let a good idea go to waste. And road tests of broomsticks, and the cat's column. Anyway, your aunt could be a witch, said Pepper. In secret, she could be your aunt all day and go witching at night. Not my aunt, said Wensleydale darkly. And recipes, said Brian. New uses for leftover toad. Oh, shut up, said Pepper. Brian snorted. If it had been Wensley who had said that, there had been a half-hearted scuffle, as between friends. But the other them had long ago learned that Pepper did not consider herself bound by the informal conventions of brotherly scuffles. She could kick and bite with astonishing physiological accuracy for a girl of 11. Besides, at 11 years old, the them were beginning to be bothered by the dim conception that laying hands on good old Pep moved things into blood-thumping categories they weren't entirely at home with yet. Besides, earning you a snake-fast blow that would have floored the Karate Kid. But she was good to have in your gang. They remembered with pride the time when Greasy Johnson and his gang had taunted them for playing with a girl. Pepper had erupted the fury that had caused Greasy's mother to come round that evening and complain. Footnote reads, Greasy Johnson was a sad and oversized child. There was one in every school, not exactly fat, but simply huge and wearing almost the same size clothes as his father. Paper tore under his tremendous fingers. Pens shattered in his grip. Children whom he tried to play with in quiet, friendly games ended up getting under his huge feet. And Greasy Johnson had become a bully almost in self-defense. After all, it was better to be called a bully, which at least implied some sort of control and desire, than to be called a big clumsy oaf. He was the despair of the sportsmaster, because if Greasy Johnson had taken the slightest interest in sport, then the school could have been champions. But Greasy Johnson had never found a sport that suited him. He was instead secretly devoted to his collection of tropical fish, which won him prizes. Greasy Johnson was the same age as Adam Young, to within a few hours, and his parents had never told him he was adopted. See? You were right about the babies. But Greasy Johnson. Let's see. Pepper looked upon him, a giant male, as a natural enemy. She herself had a short red hair, and a face which was not so much freckled as one big freckle with occasional areas of skin. Pepper's given first names were Pippin, Galadriel, Moonchild. She had been given them in a naming ceremony in a muddy valley field that contained 3 sick sheep and a number of leaky polythene teepees. Her mother had chosen the Welsh valley of Bandy-Girdle as the ideal site to return to nature. 6 months later, sick of the rain, the mosquitoes, the men, the tent-trampling sheep who ate first the whole commune's marijuana crop and then its antique minibus, and by now beginning to glimpse why almost the entire drive of human history has been an attempt to get as far away from nature as possible, Pepper's mother returned to Pepper's surprised grandparents in Tadfield, bought a bra, and enrolled in a sociology course with a deep sigh of relief. There are only 2 ways a child can go with a name like Pippin Galadriel Moonchild, and Pepper had chosen the other one. The 3 male them had learned this on their first day of school, in the playground at the age of 4. They had asked her name, and all innocent, she had told them. Subsequently, a bucket of water had been needed to separate Pippin Galadriel's Moonchild's teeth from Adam's shoe. Wensleydale's first pair of spectacles had been broken, and Brian's sweater needed 5 stitches. The them were together from then on, and Pepper was Pepper forever, except to her mother, and when they were feeling especially courageous, and the them were almost out of earshot. Greasy Johnson and the Johnsonites, the village only other gang. Adam drummed his heels on the edge of the milk crate that was doing the office a seat, listening to the bickering with the relaxed air of a king listening to the idle chatter of his courtiers. He chewed lazily on a straw. It was a Thursday morning. The holidays stretched ahead, endless and unsullied. They needed filling up. He let the conversation float around him like the buzzing of grasshoppers, or more precisely, like a prospector watches the churning gravel for a glint of useful gold. In our Sunday paper it said there was thousands of witches in the country, said Brian, worshipping nature and eating health food and that, so I don't see why we shouldn't have one around here. They were flooding the country with a wave of mindless evil, it said. What, by worshipping nature and eating health food? Said Wensleydale. That's what it said. The them gave this due consideration. They had once, at Adam's instigation, tried the health food diet for a whole afternoon. Their verdict was that you could live very well on healthy food provided you had a big cooked lunch beforehand. Brian leaned forward conspiratorially. And it said they dance round with no clothes on, he added. They go up on hills and Stonehenge and stuff and dance with no clothes on. This time the consideration was more thoughtful. The them had reached that position where, as it were, the roller coaster of life had almost completed the long haul to the top of the first big humpback of puberty, so that they could just look down into the precipitous ride ahead, full of mystery, terror, and exciting curves. Huh, said Pepper. Not my aunt, said Wensleydale, breaking the spell. Definitely not my aunt. She just keeps trying to talk to my uncle. Your uncle is dead, said Pepper. She says he still moves a glass about, said Wensleydale defensively. My father says it was moving glasses about the whole time that made him dead in the first place. Don't know why she wants to talk to him, he added. They never talked much when he was alive. That's necromancy, that is, said Brian. It's in the Bible. She ought to stop it. God's dead against necromancy and witches. You can go to hell for it. There was a lazy shifting of position on the milk crate throne. Adam was going to speak. The Dem felt silent. Adam was always worth listening to. Deep in their hearts, the Dem knew that they weren't a gang of 4. They were a gang of 3, which belonged to Adam. But if you wanted excitement and interest in crowded days, then every Dem would prize a lowly position in Adam's gang above leadership of any other gang anywhere. I don't see why everyone's so down on witches, Adam said. The Dem glanced at one another. This sounded promising. Well, they blight crops, said Pepper, and sink ships, and tell you if you're going to be king and stuff, and brew up stuff with herbs. My mother uses herbs, said Adam. So does yours. Oh, those are all right, said Brian, determined not to lose his position as a cult expert. I expect God said it was all right to use mint and sage and so on. Stands to reason there's nothing wrong with mint and sage. And they can make you be ill just by looking at you, said Pepper. It's called the evil eye. They give you a look and then you get ill and no one knows why. And they make a model of you and stick it full of pins and you get ill where all the pins are, she added cheerfully. That sort of thing doesn't happen anymore, reiterated Wensleydale, the rational thinking person. 'Cause we invented science and all the vicars set fire to the witches for their own good. It was called the Spanish Inquisition. Then I reckon we should find out if her at Jasmine Cottage is a witch, and if she is, we should tell Mr. Pickersgill, said Brian. Mr. Pickersgill was the vicar. Currently, he was in dispute with them over subjects ranging from climbing the yew tree in the churchyard to ringing the bells and running away. I don't reckon it's allowed, going round setting fire to people, said Adam. Otherwise people would be doing it all the time. It's all right if they're religious, said Brian reassuringly. And it stops the witches from going to hell, so I expect they'd be quite grateful if they understood it properly. Can't see Picky setting fire to anyone, said Pepper. Oh, I don't know, said Brian meaningfully. Not actually setting them on actual fire, sniffed Pepper. He's more likely to tell their parents and leave it up to them if anyone's going to be set on fire or not. The Dem shook their hands in disgust at the current low standards of ecclesiastical responsibility. Then the other 3 looked expectantly at Adam. They always looked expectantly at Adam. He was the one that had the ideas. Perhaps we ought to do it ourselves, he said. Someone ought to be doing something there's all these witches about. It's like that neighborhood watch scheme. Neighborhood witch, said Pepper. No, said Adam coldly. But we can't be the Spanish Inquisition, said Wensleydale. We're not Spanish. I bet you don't have to be Spanish to be the Spanish Inquisition, said Adam. I bet it's like Scottish eggs or American hamburgers. It just has to look Spanish. We've just got to make it look Spanish. Then everyone would know it's the Spanish Inquisition. There was silence. It was broken by the crackling of one of the empty crisp packets that accumulated wherever Brian was sitting. They looked at him. I've got a bullfight poster with my name on it, said Brian slowly. Lunchtime came and went. The new Spanish Inquisition reconvened. The head inquisitor inspected it critically. What are those? He demanded. You click them together when you dance, said Wensleydale, a shade defensively. My aunt brought them back from Spain years ago. They're called maracas, I think. They've got a picture of a Spanish dancer on them. Look. What's she dancing with a bull for? Said Adam. That's to show it's Spanish, said Wensleydale. Adam let it pass. The bullfight poster was everything Brian had promised. Pepper had something rather like a gravy boat made out of raffia. It's for putting wine in, she said defiantly. My mother bought it back from Spain. It hasn't got a bull on it, said Adam severely. It doesn't have to, Pepper countered, moving just ever so slightly into a fighting stance. Archibald. Adam hesitated. His sister Sarah and her boyfriend had also been to Spain. Sarah had returned with a very large purple toy donkey, which, while definitely Spanish, did not come up to what Adam instinctively felt should be the tone of the Spanish Inquisition. The boyfriend, on the other hand, had brought back a very ornate sword, which, despite its tendency to bend when picked up and go blunt when asked to cut paper, proclaimed itself to be made of Toledo steel. Adam had spent an instructive half hour with the encyclopedia and felt that this was just what the Inquisition needed. Subtle hints had not worked, however. In the end, Adam had taken a bunch of onions from the kitchen. They might well have been Spanish, but even Adam had to concede that, as a decor for the inquisitorial premises, they lacked that certain something. He was in no position to argue too vehemently about raffia wine holders. "Very good," he said. "You certain they're Spanish onions?" said Pepper, relaxing. "Course," said Adam. "Spanish onions. Everyone knows that." "They could be French," said Pepper doggedly. "France is famous for onions." "It doesn't matter," said Adam, who was getting fed up with onions. "France is nearly Spanish, and I don't expect witches know the difference. What with spending all their time flying around at night, it all looks like the contenong to witches. Anyway, if you don't like it, you can jolly well go and start your own inquisition anyway." For once, Pepper didn't push it. She'd been promised the post of head torturer. No one doubted who was going to be chief inquisitor. Wensleydale and Brian were less enthralled with their roles of inquisitorial guards. "Well, you don't know any Spanish," said Adam, whose lunch hour had included 10 minutes of the phrase book Sarah had bought in a haze of romanticism in Alicante. "That doesn't matter because actually you have to talk in Latin," said Wensleydale, who had also been doing some slightly more accurate lunchtime reading. "And Spanish," said Adam firmly. "That's with the Spanish Inquisition." "I don't see why it shouldn't be a British Inquisition," said Brian. "Don't see why we should have fought the Armada and everything just to have their smelly Inquisition." This had been slightly bothering Adam's patriotic sensibilities as well. "I reckon," he said, "that we should sort of start Spanish and then make it the British Inquisition when we've got the hang of it. And now," he added, "the Inquisitorial Guard will go and fetch the first witch. Por favor." The new inhabitant of Jasmine Cottage would have to wait, they decided. What they needed to do was start small and work their way up. "Art thou a witch, Ole?" said the chief inquisitor. Yes," said Pepper's little sister, who was 6 and built like a small golden-haired football. "You mustn't say yes, you got to say no," hissed the head torturer, nudging the suspect. "And then what?" demanded the suspect. "And then we torture you to make you say yes," said the head torturer. "I told you, it's good fun, the torturing, it doesn't hurt. Hasta la vista," she added quickly. The little suspect gave the decora of the inquisitorial headquarters a disparaging look. There was a decided odor of onions. "Ha," she said. "I want to be a witch with a warty nose and a green skin and a lovely cat, and I'd call it Blackie and lots of potions and—" The head torturer nodded to the chief inquisitor. "Look," said Pepper desperately, "no one's saying you can't be a witch, you just have to say you're not a witch. No point in us taking all this trouble," she added severely, "if you're going to go around saying yes the minute we ask you." The suspect considered this. "But I want to be a witch," she wailed. The male dem exchanged exhausted glances. This was out of their league. "If you just say no," said Pepper, "you can have my Cindy stable set. I've never ever used it," she added, glaring at the other dem and daring them to make a comment. "You have used it," snapped her sister. "I've seen it, and it's all worn out, and the bit where you put the hay is broken." Adam gave a magisterial cough. "Art thou a witch, viva España?" he repeated. The sister took a look at Pepper's face and decided not to chance it. "No," she decided. It was a very good torture, everyone agreed, The trouble was getting the putative witch off it. It was a hot afternoon, and the inquisitorial guards felt that they were being put upon. "Don't see why me and Brother Brian should have to do all the work," said Brother Wensleydale, wiping the sweat off his brow. "I reckon it's about time she got off and we had a go. Benedictine in a decanter." "Why have we stopped?" demanded the suspect, water pouring out of her shoes. It had occurred to the Chief Inquisitor during his research that the British Inquisition was probably not yet ready for the reintroduction of the Iron Maiden and the choke pear, but an illustration of a medieval ducking stool suggested it was tailor-made for the purpose. All you needed was a pond and some planks on a rope. It's the sort of combination that always attracted them, who never had much difficulty in finding all three. The suspect was now green to the waist. "It's just like a seesaw," she said. "Whee!" "I'm going to go home unless I can have a go," muttered Brother Brian. "Don't see why evil witches should have all the fun." "It's not allowed for Inquisitors to be tortured too," said the Chief Inquisitor sternly, but without much real feeling. It was a hot afternoon. The inquisitorial robes of old sacking were scratchy and smelled of stale barley, and the pond looked astonishingly inviting. All right, he said, and turned to the suspect. "You're a witch, all right. Don't do it again, and now you get off and let someone else have a turn. Ole," he added. "What happens now?" said Pepper's sister. Adam hesitated. Setting fire to her would probably cause no end of trouble, he reasoned. Besides, she was too soggy to burn. He was also decently aware that at some future point there would be questions asked about muddy shoes and duckweed-encrusted pink dresses. But that was the future, and it lay at the other end of a long, warm afternoon that contained planks and ropes and ponds. The future could wait. The future came and went in the mildly discouraging way that futures do. Although Mr. Young had other things on his mind apart from muddy dresses and merely banned Adam from watching television, which meant that he had to watch it on the old black and white set in his bedroom. "I don't see why we should have a hosepipe ban," Adam heard Mr. Young telling Mrs. Young. "I pay my rates like everyone else. The garden looks like the Sahara Desert. I'm surprised there was any water left in the pond. I blame it on the lack of nuclear testing myself. You used to get proper summers when I was a boy. It used to rain all the time." That had been yesterday. Now Adam slouched alone along the dusty lane. It was a good slouch. Adam had a way of slouching along that offended all right-thinking people. It wasn't that he just allowed his body to droop. He could slouch with inflections, and now the set of his shoulders reflected the hurt and bewilderment of those unjustly thwarted in their selfless desire to help their fellow men. Dust had hung heavy on the bushes. "Serve everyone right if the witches took over the whole country and made everyone eat health food and not go to church and dance around with no clothes on," he said, kicking a stone. He had to admit that, except perhaps for the health food, the prospect wasn't too worrying. "I bet if they just let us get started properly, we could have found hundreds of witches," he told himself, kicking a stone. "I bet old Torturmada didn't have to give up just when he was getting started, just because some stupid witch got her dress dirty." Dog slouched along dutifully behind his master. This wasn't insofar as the hellhound had any expectations what he had imagined life would be like in the last days before Armageddon, but despite himself he was beginning to enjoy it. He heard his master say, "But bet even the Victorians didn't force people to have to watch black and white television." Form shapes nature. There are certain ways of behavior appropriate to small scruffy dogs which are, in fact, welded into the genes. You can't just become a small dog shaped and hope to stay the same person. A certain intrinsic small dogness begins to permeate your very being. He'd already chased a rat. It had been the most enjoyable experience of his life. "Serve him right if we're all overcome by evil forces," his master grumbled. And then there were cats, thought Dog. He'd surprised a huge ginger cat from the next door and had attempted to reduce it to cowering jelly by means of the usual glowing stare and deep-throated growl, which had always worked on the damned in the past. This time they earned him a whack on the nose and had made his eyes water. Cats, Dog considered, were clearly a lot tougher than lost souls. He was looking forward to a further cat experiment, which he'd planned would consist of jumping around and yapping excitedly at it. It was a long shot, but it might just work. "They just better not come running to me when old Picky's turned into a frog, that's all," muttered Adam. It was at this point that two facts dawned on him. One was that his disconsolate footsteps had led him past Jasmine Cottage. The other was that someone was crying. Adam was a soft touch for tears. He hesitated a moment and then cautiously peered over the hedge. To Anathema sitting in a deck chair and halfway through a packet of Kleenex. It looked like the rise of a small, disheveled sun. Adam doubted that she was a witch. Adam had a very clear mental picture of a witch. The Youngs restricted themselves to the only possible choice amongst the better class of Sunday newspaper, and so 100 years of enlightened occultism had passed Adam by. She didn't have a hooked nose or warts, and she was young. Well, quite young. That was good enough for him. "Hello," he said, unslouching. She blew her nose and stared at him. What was looking over the hedge should be described at this point. What Anathema saw was, she said later, something like a prepubescent Greek god, or maybe a biblical illustration, one which showed muscular angels doing some righteous smiting. It was a face that didn't belong to the 20th century. It was thatched with golden curls which glowed. Michelangelo should have sculpted it. He probably would not have included the battered sneakers, frayed jeans, or grubby t-shirt, though. "Who are you?" she said. "I'm Adam Young," said Adam. I live just down the lane." "Oh, yes, I've heard of you," said Anathema, dabbing at her eyes. Adam preened. "Mrs. Henderson said I was to be sure to keep an eye out for you," she went on. "I'm well known around here," said Adam. "She said you were born to hang," said Anathema. Adam grinned. Notoriety wasn't as good as fame, but was heaps better than obscurity. "She said you were the worst of the lot of them," said Anathema, looking a little more cheerful. Adam nodded. "She said, 'You watch out for them, miss. They're nothing but a pack of ringleaders. That young Adam's full of the old Adam,' she said." "What have you been crying for?" said Adam bluntly. Oh, I've just lost something," said Anathema. "A book." "I'll help you look for it if you like," said Adam gallantly. "I know quite a lot about books, actually. I wrote a book once. It was a terrific book. It was nearly 8 pages long. It was about this pirate who was a famous detective, and I drew the pictures." And then, in a flash of largesse, he added, "If you like, I'll let you read it. I bet it is a lot more exciting than any book you've lost. Especially the bit on the spaceship where the dinosaur comes out and fights with the cowboys. I bet it'd cheer you up, my book. It cheered up Brian no end. He said he'd never been so cheered up." Thank you. I'm sure your book is a very good book," she said, endearing herself to Adam forever. "But I don't need you to help look for my book. I think it's too late now." She looked thoughtfully at Adam. "I expect you know this area very well," she said. "For miles and miles," said Adam. "You haven't seen 2 men in a big black car," said Anathema. "Did they steal it?" said Adam, suddenly full of interest. Foiling a gang of international book thieves would make a rewarding end to the day. "Not really. Sort of. I mean, they didn't mean to. They were looking for the manor, but I went up there today and no one knows anything about them. There was some sort of accident or something, I believe." She stared at Adam. There was something odd about him, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She just had an urgent feeling that he was important and shouldn't be allowed to drift away. Something about him. "What's this book called?" said Adam. "The Nice and Accurate Prophecies of Agnes Nutter. Witch," said Anathema. Which what? No, which, like in Macbeth, said Anathema. I saw that, said Adam. It was really interesting, the way them kings carried on. Gosh, what's nuts about them? Nice used to mean, well, precise, or exact. Definitely something strange. A sort of laid-back intensity. You started to feel that if he was around, then everyone else, even the landscape, was just background. She'd been here a month, except for Mrs. Henderson, who in theory looked after the cottage and probably went through her things given half a chance. She hadn't exchanged more than a dozen real words with anyone. She let them think she was an artist. This was the kind of countryside that artists liked. Actually, it was bloody beautiful. Just around this village it was superb. If Turner and Landseer had met Samuel Palmer in a pub and worked it all out and then got Stubbs to do the horses, it couldn't have been better. And that was depressing, because this was where it was going to happen. According to Agnes anyway, in a book which she, Anathema, had allowed to be lost. She had the file cards, of course, but they just weren't the same. If Anathema had been in full control of her mind at that moment, and no one around Adam was ever in full control of his or her own mind, she'd have noticed that whenever she tried to think about him beyond a superficial level, her thoughts slipped away like a duck off water. Wicked, said Adam, who had been turning over in his mind the implications of a book of nice and accurate prophecies. It tell you who's going to win the Grand National, does it? No. Any spaceship in it? Not many, said Anathema. Robots? Said Adam hopefully. Sorry. It doesn't sound very nice to me then, said Adam. Don't see what the future's got in it if there's no robots and spaceships. About 3 days, thought Anathema glumly. That's what it's got in it. Would you like a lemonade? She said. Adam hesitated. Then he decided to take the bull by the horns. Look, excuse me for asking, if it's not a personal question, but are you a witch? He said. Anathema narrowed her eyes. So much for Mrs. Henderson poking around. Some people might say so, she said. Actually, I'm an occultist. Oh, well, that's all right then, said Adam, cheering up. She looked him up and down. You know what an occultist is, do you? She said. Oh, yes, said Adam confidently. Well, so long as you're happier now, said Anathema. Come on in. I could do with a drink myself. And, Adam Young? Yes? You were thinking, nothing wrong with my eyes. They don't need examining, weren't you? Who, me? Said Adam guiltily. Okay, let's take this ad break. And then we'll continue. End of chapter, by the way. Well, not the real chapter, but mid-chapter, end of chapter. So I'll be right back. Hello. Hi, Tofu. Hi, Eisenheim. Hello, everybody who came in. Hi, Waterfall as well. I'm back. Music, go away. You're doubling up. See you later, Music Gator. Dang, ads interrupted me before I could get to the end of the chapter. But anyway, let us continue, shall we? I like the Inquisition a bunch. It's just little babbies babbling about. It's great. It's great stuff. But yeah, let us continue. Dog was the problem. He wouldn't go in the cottage. He crouched on the doorstep, growling. Come on, you silly dog, said Adam. It's only old Jasmine Cottage. He gave Anathema an embarrassed look. Normally he does everything I say, right off. You can leave him in the garden, said Anathema. No, said Adam. He's got to do what he's told. I read it in a book. Training is very important. Any dog can be trained, it said. My father said I can only keep him if he's properly trained. Now, dog, go inside. The dog whined and gave him a pleading look. His stubby tail thumped on the floor once or twice. His master voice. With extreme reluctance, as if making progress in the teeth of a gale, he slunk over the doorstep. There, said Adam proudly. Good boy. And a little bit more of hell burned away. Anathema shut the door. There had always been a horseshoe over the door of Jasmine Cottage, ever since its first tenant centuries before. The Black Death was all the rage at the time, and he'd considered that he could use all the protection he could get. It was corroded and half-covered the paint of centuries, so neither Adam nor Anathema gave it a thought, or noticed how it was now cooling from a wide heat. Aziraphale's cocoa was stone cold. The only sound in the room was the occasional turning of a page. Every now and again there was a rattling at the door when prospective customers of intimate books next door mistook the entrance. He ignored it. Occasionally he would very nearly swear. Anathema hadn't really made herself at home in the cottage. Most of her implements were piled up on the table. It looked interesting. It looked, in fact, as though voodoo presage had had a run of a scientific equipment store. Brilliant, said Adam, prodding at it. What's the thing with the 3 legs? It's a theodolite, said Anathema from the kitchen. It's for tracking ley lines. What are they then? Said Adam. She told him. Core, he said. Are they? Yes. All over the place? Yes. I've never seen them. Amazing, there being all these invisible lines of force around and me not seeing them. Adrian didn't often listen, but he spent the most enthralling 20 minutes of his life, or at least of his life that day. No one in the young household so much as touched wood or threw salt over their shoulder. The only nod in the direction of supernatural was a half-hearted pretense when Adam had been younger that Father Christmas came down the chimney. Footnote reading, if Adam had been in full possession of his powers in those days, the young Christmas would have been spoiled with the discovery of a dead fat man upside down in their central heating duct. He'd been starved of anything more occult than a harvest festival. Her words poured into his mind like water into a quire of blotting paper. Dog lay under the table and growled. He was beginning to have serious doubts about himself. Anathema didn't only believe in ley lines, but in seals, whales, bicycles, rainforests, a whole grain in loaves, recycled paper, white South Africans out of South Africa, and Americans out of practically everywhere down to and including Long Island. She didn't compartmentalize her beliefs. They were welded into one enormous seamless belief, compared with which that held by Joan of Arc seemed a mere idle notion. On any scale of mountain moving it shifted at least 0.5 of an alp. Footnote reading. It may be worth noting here that most human beings can barely raise more than 0.3 of an alp, 30 centi-alps. Adam believed things on a scale ranging from 2 to 15,640 Everests. Huh? What? Okay. No one had ever used the word environment in Adam's hearing before. The South American rainforests were a closed book to Adam, and it wasn't even made of recycled paper. The only time he interrupted her was to agree with her views on nuclear power. I've been to a nuclear power station. It was boring. There was no green smoke and the bubbling stuff in tubes. It shouldn't be allowed not having proper bubbling stuff when people have come all the way to see it, and having just a lot of men standing around not even wearing spacesuits. They do all the bubbling after visitors have gone home, said Anathema grimly. Huh, said Adam. They should be done away with this minute. Serve them right for not bubbling, said Adam. Anathema nodded. She was still trying to put her finger on what was so odd about Adam, and then she realized what it was. He had no aura. She was quite an expert on auras. She could see them, if she stared hard enough. There were a little glow of light around people's heads, and according to a book she'd read, the color told you things about their health and general well-being. Everyone had one. In mean-minded, closed-in people, they were a faint, trembling outline, whereas expansive and creative people might have one extending several inches from the body. She'd never heard of anyone without one at all, but she couldn't see one around Adam at all. Yet, he seemed cheerful, enthusiastic, and as well-balanced as a gyroscope. Maybe I'm just tired, she thought. Anyway, she was pleased and gratified to find such a rewarding student, and even loaned him some copies of New Aquarian Digest, a small magazine edited by a friend of hers. It changed his life. At least, it changed his life for that day. To his parents' astonishment, he went to bed early and then lay under the blankets until after midnight with a torch, the magazines, and a bag of sherbet lemons. The occasional brilliant emerged from his ferocious chewing mouth. When the batteries ran out, he emerged into the darkened room and lay back with his head pillowed in his hands, apparently watching the squadron of X-Wing, trademarked, fighters that hung from the ceiling. They moved gently in the night breeze. But Adam wasn't really watching them. He was staring instead into the brightly lit panorama of his own imagination, which was whirling like a fairground. This wasn't Wensleydale's aunt in a wineglass. This sort of occulting was a lot more interesting. Besides, he liked Anathema. Of course, she was very old, but when Adam liked someone, he wanted to make them happy. He wondered how he could make Anathema happy. It used to be thought that the events that changed the world were things like big bombs, maniac politicians, huge earthquakes, or vast population movements. But it was now been realized that this is a very old-fashioned view held by people totally out of touch with modern thought. The things that really change the world, according to chaos theory, are the tiny things. A butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazonian jungle, and subsequently a storm ravages half of Europe. Somewhere in Adam's sleeping head, a butterfly had emerged. It may or may not have helped Anathema get a clearer view of things if she'd been allowed to spot the very obvious reason why she couldn't see Adam's aura. It was for the same reason that people in Trafalgar Square can't see England. Let me just have a little drink. I suppose that means that the R is just too dang big. It's like England is too dang big to see all of it, huh? But, now let's continue. Alarms went off. Of course, there's nothing special about alarms going off in the control room of a nuclear power station. They do it all the time. It's because there are many dials and meters and things that something important might not get noticed if it doesn't at least beep. And the job shift charge engineer calls for a solid, capable, and flexible kind of man. The kind of you can depend upon not to make a beeline for the car park in an emergency. The kind of man, in fact, who gives the impression of smoking a pipe even when he's not. It was 3 a.m. in the control room of Turning Point Power Station, normally a nice quiet time when there is nothing much to do but fill in the log and listen to the distant roar of the turbines. Until now. Horace Gander looked at the flashing red lights. Then he looked at some dials. Then he looked at the faces of his fellow workers. Then he raised his eyes to the big dial at the far end of the room. 420 practically dependable and very nearly cheap megawatts were leaving the station. According to the other dials, nothing was producing them. He didn't say, "That's weird." He wouldn't have said, "That's weird," if a flock of sheep had cycled past playing violins. It wasn't the sort of thing a responsible engineer said. What he did say was, "Alf, you'd better ring the station manager." 3 very crowded hours went past. They involved quite a lot of phone calls, telexes, and faxes. 27 people got out of bed in quick succession, and they got another 53 out of bed, because if there's one thing a man wants to know when he's woken up in a panic at 4 a.m., it's that he's not alone. Anyway, you need all sorts of permissions before they let you unscrew the lid of a nuclear reactor and look inside. They got them. They unscrewed it. They had to look inside. Horace Gander said, "There's got to be a sensible reason for this. 500 tons of uranium don't just get up and walk away." A meter in his hand should have been screaming. Instead, it let out the occasional half-hearted tick. Where the reactor should have been was an empty space. It could have had quite a nice game of squash in it. Right at the bottom, all alone in the center of the bright cold floor, was a lemon sherbet. And outside in the cavernous turbine hall, the machines roared on. And 100 miles away, Adam Young turned over in his sleep. Alright, that's the end of that chapter. Okay, this next chapter is an hour long apparently, so that's gonna be like the entirety of what we'll read today, I suppose, because otherwise we'll be here all night. It's a big un, as they say. It's a fun book, Tofu, yeah. Now we can listen to my rendition of impeccable and not stumbling reading. Yes. I'm quite liking it. Terry Pratchett's books are just very fun in general, it seems. I need to read more. And maybe Douglas Adams too. I need to continue that as well. There's just too many dang books that I haven't read. Oh, hold on. Let me like, oh god, my phone is like far away. Hold on. I wanted to like post you the starting letter of each chapter so that you may delight in it as well. This one has a teacup on it, or perhaps a soup bowl. I'm not sure. Hold on, let me grab my phone. Let me grab my phone and take a photograph of the thing. Whoop. R. Open the photo. No, yeah, you don't need to tell me the same hint about stupid Windows. I hate you. Zoom in a bit. Oh, it's got all the skulls on it. Look at it. It's hard to see it on like the actual thing because it just too damn. It's so small. I guess it's like a soup bowl, yeah. Cursed Cocoa Puffs. They're smoking. I'm gonna have to go back later and look at the other letters and see if what the pictures are on those. I didn't really pay attention very much. But anyway, Batcam still censored? Oh yes, thank you. Anyway, let me just continue this reading. Raven Sable, slim and bearded and dressed all in black, sat in the back of his slimline black limousine, talking on his slimline black telephone to his West Coast base. "How's it going?" he asked. "Looking good, Chief," as said his marketing head. "I'm doing breakfast with the buyers from all the leading supermarket chains tomorrow. No problem. We'll have meals TM in all the stores this time next month." "Good work, Nick." No problem. It's knowing you're behind us, Rave. You give great leadership, guy. Works for me every time." "Thank you," said Sable, and he broke the connection. He was particularly proud of meals TM. The Nutrition Corporation had started small 11 years ago. Nutrition, by the way, being spelled new as in N-E-W, trition. A small team of food scientists, a huge team of marketing and public relations personnel, and a neat logo. 2 years of nutrition investment and research had procured Chow TM. Chow TM contained spun, plated, and woven protein molecules, capped and coated, carefully designed to be ignored by even the most ravenous digestive tract enzymes. No cal sweeteners, mineral oils replacing vegetable oils, fibrous materials, colorings, and flavorings. The end result was a foodstuff almost indistinguishable from any other except for two things. Firstly, the price, which was slightly higher, and secondly, the nutritional content, which was roughly equivalent to that of Sony Walkman. It didn't matter how much you ate, you lost weight. The footnote reading, and hair, and skin tone, and if you ate enough of it, long enough, vital signs. Fat people had bought it. Thin people who didn't want to get fat had bought it. Chow TM was the ultimate diet food, carefully spun, woven, textured, and pounded to imitate anything, from potatoes to venison, although the chicken sold best. Sable sat back and watched the money roll in. He watched Chow gradually fill the ecological niche that used to be filled by the old, untrademarked food. He followed Chow with snacks, junk food made from real junk. Meals was Sable's latest brainwave. Meals was Chow with added sugar and fat. The theory was that if you ate enough meals, you would get A, very fat, and B, die of malnutrition. The paradox delighted Sable. Meals were currently being tested all over America. Pizza meals, fish meals, Szechuan meals, macrobiotic rice meals, even hamburger meals. Sable's limousine was parked in the lot of a Des Moines, Iowa burger lord, a fast food franchise wholly owned by his organization. It was here they'd been piloting hamburger meals for the last 6 months. He wanted to see what kind of results they'd been getting. He leaned forward, tapped the chauffeur's glass partition. The chauffeur pressed a switch and it slid open. "Sir?" "I'm going to take a look at our operation, Marlin. I'll be 10 minutes, then back to L.A. Sir." Sable sauntered into the burger lord. It was exactly like every other burger lord in America. Footnote reading, but not like every other burger lord across the world. German burger lords, for example, sold lager instead of root beer, while English burger lords managed to take any American fast food virtues, the speed with which your food was delivered, for example, and carefully remove them. Your food arrived after half an hour, at room temperature, and it was only because of the strip of warm lettuce between them that you could distinguish the burger from the bun. The burger lord Pathfinder salesman had been shot 25 times after setting foot in France. McLordy the clown danced in the kiddie corner. Serving staff had identical gleaming smiles that never reached their eyes, and behind the counter a chubby middle-aged man in a burger lord uniform slapped burgers onto the griddle, whistling softly, happy in his work. Sable went up to the counter. "Hello, my name is Marie," said the girl behind the counter. "How can I help you?" "A double blaster thunder big un, extra fries, hold the mustard," he said. "Anything to drink?" "A special thick whippy choco banana shake." She pressed the little pictogram squares on her till. Literacy was no longer a requirement for employment in these restaurants. Smiling was. Then she turned to the chubby man behind the counter. "DBTB-EF, hold mustard," she said. "Chuck shake." Crooned the cook. He sorted the food into little paper containers, pausing only to brush the graying cowlick from his eyes. "Here you are," he said. She took them without looking at him, and he returned cheerfully to his griddle, singing quietly, "Love me tender, love me long, never let me go." The man's humming, Sable noted, clashed with the burger lord background music. a tiny tape loop of the Burger Lord commercial jingle, and he made a mental note to have him fired. Hello, my name is Marie, gave Sable his meal TM, and told him to have a nice day. He found a small plastic table, sat down in the plastic seat, and examined his food. Artificial bread roll, artificial burger, fries that had never even seen potatoes, foodless sauces, even, and Sable was especially pleased with this, an artificial slice of dill pickle. He didn't bother to examine his milkshake. It had no actual food content. But then again, neither did those sold by any of his rivals. All around him people were eating. Their unfood with, if not actual evidence of enjoyment, then with no more actual disgust than was to be found in burger chains all over the planet. He stood up, took his tray over to the "please dispose of your refuse with care" receptacle, and dumped the whole thing. If you had told him that there were children starving in Africa, he would have been flattered that you'd noticed. There was a tug at his sleeve. Party name of Sable? Asked a small bespectacled man in an International Express cap holding a brown paper parcel. Sable nodded. Thought it was you. Looked around, thought, tall, gent with a beard, nice suit, can't be that many of them there. Package for you, sir. Sable signed for it. His real name, 1 word, 6 letters. Sounds like examine. Thank you kindly, sir, said the delivery man. He paused. Here, he said. That bloke behind the counter, does he remind you of anyone? No, said Sable. He gave the man a tip, $5, and opened the package. In it was a small pair of brass scales. Sable smiled. It was a slim smile, and was gone almost instantly. About time, he said. He thrust the scales into his pocket, unheeding of the damage being done to the sleek line of his black suit, and went back to the limo. Back to the office? Asked the chauffeur. The airport, said Sable, and call ahead. I want a ticket to England. Yes, sir. Return ticket to England. Sable fingered the scales in his pocket. Make that a single, he said. I'll be making my own way back. Oh, and call the office for me. Cancel all appointments. How long for, sir? The foreseeable future. And in the Burger Lord, behind the counter, the stout man with the cowlick slid another half-dozen burgers onto the grill. He was the happiest man in the whole world, and he was thinking, very softly, "You ain't never caught a rabbit," he hummed to himself, "and you ain't no friend of mine." Is Elvis working in a burger joint? Well, there you go. That conspiracy theory was true. All right, let's continue. But yeah, there's a lot happening. It's just a lot in this book. The Dem listened with interest. There was a light drizzle which was barely kept at bay by the old iron sheets and frayed bits of lino that roofed their den in the quarry. And they always looked to Adam to think up things to do when it was raining. They weren't disappointed. Adam's eyes were agleam with the joy of knowledge. It had been 3 a.m. before he'd gone to sleep under a pile of new aquarians. And then there was this man called Charles Fort, he said. He could make it rain fish and frogs and stuff. Huh, said Pepper. I bet. Alive frogs? Oh yes, said Adam, warming to his subject, hopping around and croaking and everything. People paid him money to go away in the end, and then... He racked his brains for something that would satisfy his audience. He'd done for Adam a lot of reading in one go. And he sailed off in the Mary Celeste and founded the Bermuda Triangle. It's in Bermuda, he added helpfully. No, he couldn't have done that, said Wensleydale sternly, because I've read about the Mary Celeste, and there was no one on it. It's famous for having no one on it. They found it floating around all by itself with no one on it." "I didn't say he was on it when they found it, did I?" said Adam scathingly. "Course he wasn't on it, 'cause of the UFOs landing and taking him off. I thought everyone knew about that." The Dem relaxed a bit. They were on firmer ground with UFOs. They weren't entirely certain about New Age UFOs, though. They'd listened politely to Adam on the subject, but somehow modern UFOs lacked punch. "If I was an alien," said Pepper, voicing the opinion of them all, "I wouldn't go around telling people all about my mystic cosmic harmony, I'd say." Her voice became hoarse and nasal, like someone hampered by an evil black mask. "This is a lasher blaster. Show you do what you're told, rebel swine." They all nodded. A favorite game in the quarry had been based on a highly successful film series, Lasers, Robots, and the princess who wore her hair like a pair of stereo headphones. It had been agreed without a word being said that if anyone was going to play the part of any stupid princesses, it wasn't going to be Pepper. But the game normally ended, and the fight should be the one who was allowed to wear the coal scuttle and blow up planets. Adam was best at it when he was the villain. He really sounded as if he could blow up the world. The Dem were, anyway, temperamentally on the side of planet destroyers, provided they could be allowed to rescue princesses at the same time. "I suspect that's what they used to do," said Adam, "but now it's different. They all have this bright blue light around them and go around doing good. Sort of galactic policemen going around telling everyone to live in universal harmony and stuff." There was a moment's silence when they pondered those ways of perfectly good UFOs. "What I wondered," said Brian, "is why they call them UFOs when they know they're flying saucers. I mean, they're identified flying objects then." "It's 'cause the government hushes it all up," said Adam. "Millions of flying saucers landing all the time and the government keeps hushing it up." "Why?" said Wensleydale. Adam hesitated. His reading hadn't provided a quick explanation for this. New Aquarian just took it as the foundation of belief, both of itself and its readers, that the government hushed everything up. "'Cause they're the government," said Adam simply. "That's what governments do. They've got this great big building in London full of books of all the things they've hushed up. When the Prime Minister gets into work in the morning, the first thing he does is go through the big list of everything that's happened in the night and put this big red stamp on them." "I bet he has a cup of tea first and then reads the paper," said Wensleydale, who had on one memorable occasion during the holidays gone unexpectedly into his father's office, where he had formed certain impressions, "and talks about what was on TV last night." "Well, all right, but after that," he gets out the book and the big stamp. "Which says, 'Hush it up,'" said Pepper. "It says 'Top Secret,'" said Adam, resenting this attempt at bipartisan creativity. "It's like nuclear power stations. They keep blowing up all the time, but no one ever finds out 'cause the government hushes it up." "They don't keep blowing up all the time," said Wensleydale severely. "My father says they're dead safe and mean we don't have to live in a greenhouse. Anyway, there's a big picture of one in my comic, and it doesn't say anything about it blowing up." Okay, the footnote says, Wensleydale's alleged comic was a 94-week part work called Wonders of Nature and Science. He had every single one so far and had asked for a set of binders for his birthday. Brian's weekly reading was anything with a lot of exclamation marks in the title, like whiz and clang. So was Pepper's. Although even under the most refined of tortures, she still wouldn't admit to the fact that she also bought Just 17 under plain covers. Adam didn't read any comics at all. They never lived up to the kind of things he could do in his head. "Yes," said Brian, "but you lent me that comic afterwards and I know what type of picture it was." Wensleydale hesitated, and then said in a voice heavy with a badly tried patience, "Brian, just because it said exploded diagram—" There was the usual brief scuffle. "Look," said Adam severely, "do you want me to tell you about the aquarium age or not?" The fight, never very serious amongst the siblinghood of the Them, subsided. Right, said Adam. He scratched his head. Now you've made me forget where I've got to go. Where I've got you, he complained. Flying saucers, said Brian. Right. Well, if you do see a flying UFO, these government men come and tell you off, said Adam, getting back into his stride. In a big black car. It happens all the time in America. The Dem nodded sagely. Of this at least they had no doubt. America was to them the place that good people went to when they died. They were prepared to believe that just about anything could happen in America. Probably because causes traffic jams, said Adam. All these men in black cars going about telling people off for seeing UFOs. They tell you that if you go on seeing them, you'll have a nasty accident. Probably get run over by a big black car, said Brian, picking at his cap on a dirty knee. He brightened up. Do you know, he said, my cousin said that in America there's shops that sell 39 different flavors of ice cream. This even silenced Adam, briefly. There aren't even 39 flavors of ice cream, said Pepper. There aren't 39 flavors in the whole world. There couldn't be if you mix there could be if you mix them up, said Wensleydale, blinking owlishly. You know, strawberry and chocolate and vanilla. He sought for more English flavors. Strawberry and vanilla and chocolate, he added lamely. And then there's Atlantis, said Adam loudly. He had their interest there. They enjoyed Atlantis. Cities that sank under the sea were right up them's street. They listened intently to a jumbled account of pyramids, weird priesthood, and ancient secrets. Did it just happen sudden or slowly, said Brian. Sort of sudden and slowly, said Adam, 'cause a lot of them got away and boats to all the other countries and taught them how to do maths and English and history and stuff. Don't see what's so great about that, said Pepper. Could have been good fun when it was sinking, said Brian wistfully, recalling the one occasion when Lower Tadfield had been flooded. People delivering the milk and newspapers by boat, no one having to go to school. If I was an Atlantean, I'd have stayed, said Wensleydale. This was greeted with a disdainful laughter, but he pressed on. You just have to wear a diver's helmet, that's all, and nail all the windows shut and fill the houses with air. It would be great. Adam greeted this with a chilly stare that he reserved for any of them who came up with an idea he really wished he'd thought of first. They could have done, he conceded, somewhat weakly. After they'd sent all the teachers off in the boats, maybe everyone else stayed on when it went down. You wouldn't have to wash, said Brian, whose parents forced him to wash a great deal more than he thought could possibly be healthy. Not that it did any good. There was something basically ground in about Brian. Because everything would stay clean, and you could grow seaweed and stuff in the garden, and shoot sharks, and have pet octopuses and stuff, and there wouldn't be any schools and stuff because they'd get rid of all the teachers. They could still be down there now, said Pepper. They thought about the Atlanteans, clad in flowing mystic robes and goldfish bowls, enjoying themselves deep under the choppy waters of the ocean. Huh, said Pepper, summing up their feelings. What shall we do now, said Brian. It's brightened up a bit. In the end, they played Charles Fort Discovering Things. This consisted of one of them walking around with the ancient remains of an umbrella, while the others treated him to a rain of frogs, or rather, frog. They could only find one in the pond. It was an elderly frog who knew of the Dem of old and tolerated their interest as the price it paid for a pond otherwise free of moorhens and pike. It put up with things good-naturedly for a while before hopping off to a secret and so far undiscovered hideout in an old drainpipe. Then they went home for lunch. Adam felt very pleased about the morning's work. He'd always known that the world was an interesting place, and his imagination had peopled it with pirates and bandits and spies and astronauts and similar. But he'd also had a nagging suspicion that, when you seriously got right down to it, They were all just things in books and didn't properly exist anymore. Whereas this aquarium age stuff was really real. Grown-up people wrote lots of books about it. The Aquarian was full of adverts for them. And Bigfoots and Mothmen and Yetis and sea monsters and Surrey pumas really existed. If Cortez, on his peak in Darien, had slightly damp feet from efforts at catching frogs, he'd have felt just like Adam at that moment. The world was bright and strange, and he was in the middle of it. He bolted his lunch and retired to his room. There were still quite a few new Aquarians he hadn't read yet. I like the one frog they throw at each other. It's their only source of fun. That sounds like kids, alright. The cocoa was a congealed brown sludge half filling the cup. Certain people had spent hundreds of years trying to make sense of the prophecies of Agnes Nutter. They had been very intelligent in the main, and the Thema device was about as close to being Agnes as genetic rift will allow, was the best of the bunch, but none of them had been angels. Many people meeting Aziraphale for the first time formed three impressions: that he was English, that he was intelligent, and that he was geared in a tree full of monkeys on nitrous oxide. Two of them were wrong. Heaven is not in England, whatever certain poets may have thought, and angels are sexless unless they really want to make an effort. But he was intelligent, and it was an angelic intelligence which, while not being particularly higher than human intelligence, is much broader and has the advantage of having thousands of years of practice. Aziraphale was the first angel ever to own a computer. It was a cheap, slow, plasticky one, much touted as ideal for the small businessman. Aziraphale used it religiously for doing his accounts, which were so scrupulously accurate that the tax authorities had inspected him 5 times with the deep belief that he was getting away with murder somewhere. But these other calculations were of a kind no computer could ever do. Sometimes he would scribble something on a sheet of paper by his side. It was covered in symbols which only 8 other people in the world would have been able to comprehend. 2 of them had won Nobel Prizes, and one of the other 5 dribbled a lot and wasn't allowed anything sharp because of what he might do with it. Big stretch. Elvises. What's the plural of Elvis? Elvi. Maybe those are the same Elvises, but removed by several years from each other. Okay. Let us continue. Anathema lunched on miso soup and pored over her maps. There was no doubt the area around Tadfield was rich in ley lines. Even the famous Reverend Watkins had identified some, but unless she was totally wrong, they were beginning to shift position. She had spent the week taking surroundings with with Theodolite and Pendulum, and the Ordnance Survey map with the Tadfield area was now covered with little dots and arrows. She stared at them for some time. Then she picked up a felt-tip pen and, with occasional references to her notebook, began to join them up. The radio was on. She wasn't really listening, so quite a lot of the main news item passed right by her unheeding ears, and it wasn't until a couple of key words filtered down into her consciousness that she began to take notice. Some called a spokesman sounded close to hysteria. "Danger to employees or the public," he was saying. "And precisely how much nuclear material has escaped?" said the interviewer. There was a pause. "We wouldn't say escaped," said the spokesman. "Not escaped, temporarily mislaid." "You mean it's still on the premises?" "We certainly cannot see how it could have been removed from them," said the spokesman. Surely you have considered terrorist activity. There was another pause. Then the spokesman said, in the quiet tones of someone who has had enough and is going to quit after this and raise chickens somewhere, yes, I suppose we must. All we need to do is find some terrorists who are capable of taking an entire nuclear reactor out of its can while it's running and without anyone noticing. It weighs about 1,000 tons and is 40 feet high, so they'll be quite strong terrorists. Perhaps you'd like to ring them up, sir, and ask them questions in that supercilious, accusatory way of yours. But you said the power station is still producing electricity, gasped the interviewer. It is. How can it still be doing that if it hasn't got any reactors? You could see the spokesman's mad grin, even on the radio. You could see his pen poised over the farms for sale column in Poultry World. We don't know, he said. We were hoping you clever buggers at the BBC would have an idea. Anathema looked down at her map. What she had been drawing looked like a galaxy, or the type of carving seen on the better class of Celtic monolith. The leylands were shifting. They were forming a spiral. It was centered loosely, with some margin for error, but nevertheless centered on Lower Tadfield. Several thousand miles away, at almost the same moment as Anathema was staring at her spirals, the pleasure cruiser Morbili was aground in 300 fathoms of water. For Captain Vincent, this was just another problem. For example, he knew he should contact the owners, but he never knew from day to day or from hour to hour in his computerized world actually who the current owners were. Computers, that was the bloody trouble. The ship's papers were computerized and it could switch to the most currently advantageous flag of convenience in microseconds. Its navigation had been computerized as well, constantly updating its position by satellites. Captain Vincent had explained patiently to the owners, whoever they were, that several hundred square meters of steel plating and a barrel of rivets would be a better investment, and had been informed that his recommendation did not accord with current cost-benefit flow predictions. Captain Vincent strongly suspected that despite all its electronics, the ship was worth more sunk than afloat, and would probably go down as the most perfectly pinpointed wreck in nautical history. By inference, this also meant that he was more valuable dead than alive. He sat at his desk quietly leafing through international maritime codes, whose 600 pages contained brief yet pregnant messages designed to transmit the news of every conceivable nautical eventuality across the world with a minimum of confusion and, above all, cost. What he wanted to say was this: was sailing south-southwest at position 33 north, 4772 west. First mate, who you may recall was appointed in New Guinea against my wishes and is probably a headhunter, indicated by signs that something was amiss. It appears that quite a vast expanse of seabed has risen up in the night. It contains a large number of buildings, many of which appeared pyramid-like in structure. We are aground in the courtyard of one of these. There are some rather unpleasant statues. Amiable old men in long robes and diving helmets have come aboard the ship and are mingling happily with the passengers, who think we organized this. Please advise. His questing finger moved slowly down the page, and stopped. Good old international codes. They'd been devised 80 years before, but the men in those days had really thought about the kind of perils that might possibly be encountered in the deep. He picked up his pen and wrote down XXXVQVVX. Translated, it meant, have found lost continent of Atlantis. High priest has just won Quoits contest. Huh? End the chapter. Quoits, Quoits. What the hell is that? Quoits. How do you even say this? What is that? Hold on, I gotta Google that. What is that? Quoits. A traditional game which involves metal. Oh, it's like ring toss, kinda. Okay. this is apparently equates. Huh. Well, all right then. Good. Fancier ring toss, yeah. About 5 times fancier. Let us continue. It jolly well isn't. It jolly well is. It isn't, you know. It jolly well is. It isn't, all right. Then what about volcanoes? Wensleydale sat back, a look of triumph on his face. What about them? Said Adam. All that lather comes up from the center of the earth, where it's all hot, said Wensleydale. I saw a program. It said it had David Attenborough, so it's true. The other of them looked at Adam. It was like watching a tennis match. The hollow earth theory was not going over well in the quarry. A beguiling idea that had stood up to the probings of such remarkable thinkers as Cyrus Reed, Teed, Bulwer Lytton, and Adolf Hitler was beginning dangerously in the wind of Wensleydale's searingly bespectable logic. Bending dangerously, even. I didn't say it was hollow all the way through, said Adam. No one said it was hollow all the way through. It probably goes down miles and miles to make room for all the lather and oil and coal and Tibetan tunnels and such like, and then it's hollow after that. And that's what people think, and there's a hole at the North Pole to let the air in. Never seen it on an atlas, sniffed Wensleydale. The government won't let them put it on a map in case people go and have a look in, said Adam. The reason being, the people living inside don't want people looking down on them all the time. What do you mean Tibetan tunnels? Said Pepper. You said Tibetan tunnels. Ah, didn't I tell you about them? 3 heads shook. It's amazing. You know Tibet? They nodded doubtfully. A series of images had risen in their mind. Yaks, Mount Everest, people called Grasshopper, little old men sitting on mountains, other people learning kung fu in ancient temples, and snow. Well, you know all those teachers that left Atlantis when it sunk? They nodded again. Well, some of them went to Tibet, and now they run the world. They're called the Secret Masters, on account of being teachers, I suppose. And they've got the secret underground city called Shambhala, and tunnels that go all over the world, so they know everything that goes on and control everything. Some people reckon that they really live under the Gobi Desert, he added loftily. But most competent authorities reckon it's Tibet, all right. Better for the tunneling anyway. The Dem instinctively looked down at the grubby dirt-covered chalk beneath their feet. How come they know everything? Said Pepper. They just have to listen, right? Hazarded Adam. They just have to sit in their tunnels and listen. You know what hearing teachers have? They can hear a whisper right across the room. My granny used to put a glass against the wall, said Brian. She said it was disgusting the way she could hear everything that went on next door. And these tunnels go everywhere, do they? Said Pepper, still staring at the ground. All over the world, said Adam firmly. Must have took a long time, said Pepper doubtfully. You remember when we tried digging that tunnel out in the field? We were at it all afternoon and you had to scrunch it up to get all in. Yeah, but they've been doing it for millions of years. You can do really good tunnels, you got millions of years. I thought the Tibetans were conquered by the Chinese and the Dalai Lama had to go to India, said Wensleydale, but without much conviction. Wensleydale read his father's newspaper every evening, but the prosaic everydayness of the world always seemed to melt under the powerhouse of Adam's explanations. I bet they're down there now, said Adam, ignoring this. They'd be all over the place by now, sitting underground and listening. They looked at one another. If we dug down quickly, said Brian. Pepper, who was a lot quicker on the uptake, groaned. What do you have to go and say that for? Said Adam. fat a lot good us trying to surprise them now, isn't it? With you shouting out something like that. I was just thinking we could dig down and you just have to go and warn them. I don't think they dig all those tunnels, said Wensleydale doggedly. It doesn't make any sense. Tibet's hundreds of miles away. Oh yes, and I suppose you know more about it than Madame Blavatatatsky, sniffed Adam. Now, if I was a Tibetan, said Wensleydale in a reasonable tone of voice, I'd just dig straight down to the hollow bit in the middle and then run around inside and dig straight up where I want it to be. They gave this due consideration. You've got to admit that's more sensible than tunnels, said Pepper. Yes, well, I expect that's what they do, said Adam. They'd be bound to have thought of something as simple as that. Brian stared dreamily at the sky, while his finger probed the contents of one ear. Funny, really, he said. You spend your whole life going to school and learning stuff, and they never tell you about stuff like the Bermuda Triangle and UFOs and all these old masters running around inside of the Earth. Why do we have to learn boring stuff when there's all this brilliant stuff we could be learning? That's what I want to know. There was a chorus of agreement. Then they went out and played Charles Fort and the Atlanteans versus the ancient masters of Tibet, but the Tibeters claimed that using mystic ancient lasers was cheating. There was a time when witchfinders were respected, although it didn't last very long. Matthew Hopkins, for example, the witchfinder general, found witches all over the east of England in the middle of the 17th century, charging each town and village 9p a witch for every one he discovered. That was the trouble. Witchfinders didn't get paid by the hour. Any witchfinder who spent a week examining the local crones and then told the mayor, "Well done, not a pointy hat among the lot of them," would get fulsome thanks, a bowl of soup, and a meaningful goodbye. So in order to turn a profit, Hopkins had to find a reasonable number of witches. This made him more than a little unpopular with the village councils, and he was himself hanged as a witch by an East Anglian village who has sensibly realized that they could cut their overheads by eliminating the middleman. It is thought by many that Hopkins was the last witchfinder general. In this they would, strictly speaking, be correct. Possibly not in the way they imagine, however. The Witchfinder army marched on, just slightly more quietly. There is no longer a real Witchfinder general. Nor is there a Witchfinder colonel, a Witchfinder major, a Witchfinder captain, or even a Witchfinder lieutenant. The last one is killed falling out of a very tall tree in Caterham in 1933 while attempting to get a better view of something he believed was a satanic orgy of the most degenerate persuasion, but was in fact the Caterham and Whiteleaf Market Traders Association annual dinner and dance. There is, however, a Witchfinder sergeant. There is also now a Witchfinder private. His name is Newton Pulsifer. It was the advertisement that got him, in the Gazette, between a fridge for sale and a litter of not exactly Dalmatians. Join the professionals. Part-time assistant required to combat the forces of darkness. Uniform basic training provided. Field promotion certain. Be a man. In his lunch hour, he phoned the number at the bottom of the ad. A woman answered. "Hello," he began tentatively. "I saw your advert." "Which one, love?" The one in the paper." "Right, love. Well, Madame Tracy draws aside the veil every afternoon except Thursdays. Parties welcome. When would you be wanting to explore the mysteries, love?" Newton hesitated. The advert says, "Join the professionals," he said. It didn't mention Madame Tracy. "That'll be Mr. Shadwell you'll be wanting then. Just a sec. I'll see if he's in." Later, when he was on nodding terms with Madame Tracy, Newt learned that if he had mentioned the other ad, the one in the magazine, Madame Tracy would have been available for strict discipline and intimate massage every evening except Thursday. There was yet another ad in the phone box somewhere. When, much later, Newt asked her what this one involved, she said, "Thursdays." Eventually, there was the sound of feet in uncarpeted hallways. A deep coughing and a voice the color of an old raincoat rumbled. "I read your advert. Join the professionals. I wanted to know a bit more about it." "Aye. There's many as would like to know more about it, and there's many. The voice trailed off impressively, then crashed back to full volume. There's many as wouldn't. Oh, squeaked Newton. What's your name, lad? Newton. Newton Pulsifer. Lucifer! Was that you say? Are ye of the spawn of darkness, attempting beguiling creature from the pit? Wanton limbs steaming from the flesh pots of Hades, and tortured and lubricous trawl to your Stygian and hellish masters? That's Pulsifer, explained Newton, with a P. I don't know about the other stuff, but we come from Surrey. The voice on the other phone sounded vaguely disappointed. Oh, aye. Well, then, Pulsifer. Pulsifer. I've seen that name before, maybe? I don't know, said Newton. My uncle runs a toy shop in Hounslow, he added, in case this was any help. Is that so? Said Shadwell. Mr. Shadwell's accent was unplaceable. It careered around Britain like a milk race. Here a mad Welsh drill sergeant. There a High Kirk elder who'd just seen someone doing something on a Sunday. Somewhere between them, a dour Daleland shepherd. Or bitter Somerset miser. It didn't matter where the accent went. It didn't get any nicer. Have ye all your own teeth? Oh, yes, except for fillings. Are ye fit? I suppose, Neaton stuttered. I mean, that was why I wanted to join the Territorials. Brian Potter in accounting can bench press almost 100 since he joined, and he paraded in front of the Queen and Mother. How many nipples? Pardon? Nipples, laddie, nipples, said the voice testily. How many nipples have ye got? 2? Good. Have ye got your ain scissors? What? Scissors! Scissors! Are ye deaf? No. Yes, I mean, I've got some scissors. I'm not deaf. Alrighty then. Let's take this ad break before it cuts me off. And I'll be in a bit. Read. Read books. Read and be happy. Hello. Music, go away. Shut up. As totally radical it would be to read this book to the sounds of Contra, I don't think the vibes are quite correct here. Hey there, KBX. Anyway, let us continue. The hardcore OST, hell yeah, dude, is the best. The cocoa had nearly all solidified. Green fur was growing on the inside of the mug. There was a thin layer of dust on the Aziraphale, too. The stack of notes was building up beside him. The nice and accurate prophecies of the mass of alfresco bookmarks made of torn strips of the Daily Telegraph. Aziraphale stirred and pinched his nose. He was nearly there. He'd got the shape of it. He'd never met Agnes. She was too bright, obviously. Normally, heaven and hell spotted the perfected types and broadcast enough noises on the same mental channel to prevent any undue accuracy. Actually, that was rarely necessary. They normally found ways of generating their own static and self-defense against the images that echoed around their heads. Poor old St. John had his mushrooms, for example. Mother Shipton had her ale. Nostradamus had his collection of interesting oriental preparations. St. Malachi had his still. Good old St. Malachi. He'd been a nice old boy, sitting there dreaming about future popes. Complete piss artist, of course. Could have been a real thinker if it hadn't been for the Pontine. A sad end. Sometimes you really had to hope that the ineffable plan had been properly thought out. There was something he had to do. Oh yes, phone his contact, get things sorted out. He stood up, stretched his limbs, and made a phone call. Then he thought, why not? Worth a try. He went back and shuffled through his sheaf of notes. Agnes really had been good. And clever. No one was interested in accurate prophecies. Rather than paper in hand, he phoned directory enquiries. Hello? Good afternoon. So kind. Yes, this will be a Tadfield number, I think. Or Lower Tadfield. Or possibly Norton. I'm not sure of the precise code. Yes, Young. Name of Young. Sorry, no initial. Oh, well, can you give me all of them? Thank you. Back on the table, a pencil picked itself up and scribbled furiously. At the third name, it broke its point. Ah, said the Aziraphale, his mouth suddenly running on automatic while his mind exploded. I think that's the one, thank you. So kind. Good day to you. He hung up almost reverently, took a few deep breaths and dialed again. The last 3 digits gave him some trouble because his hand was shaking. He listened to the ringing tone. Then a voice answered. It was a middle-aged voice, not unfriendly, but probably it had been having a nap and was not feeling at its best. It said, Tadfield 666. Aziraphale's hand started to shake. Hello? Said the receiver. Hello? Aziraphale got a grip on himself. Sorry, he said. Right number. He replaced the receiver. Newt wasn't deaf, and he did have his own scissors. He also had a huge pile of newspapers. If he had known that army life consisted chiefly of applying the one or the other, he used to muse, he would never have joined. Witchfinder Sergeant Shadwell had made him a list, which was taped to the wall in Shadwell's tiny crowded flat situated over Rajit's newsagents and video rental. The list read, Witches, Unexplainable Phenomenons, Phenomenantrices, Phenomenize, Things ye can what I mean. Newt was looking for either. He sighted and picked up another newspaper. Scanned the front page, opened it, ignored page 2, never anything on there. Then blushed crimson as he performed the obligatory nipple count. Shadwell had been insistent about this. You can't trust them, the cunning buggers, he said. It'd be just like them to come right out in the open, like defying us. A couple in black turtleneck sweaters glowered at the camera on page 9. They claimed to lead the largest coven in Saffron Walden and to restore sexual potency by the use of small and very phallic dolls. The newspaper was offering 10 of the dolls to readers who were prepared to write my most embarrassing moment of impotency stories. Newt cut the story out and stuck it into a scrapbook. There was a muffled thumping on the door. Newt opened it. A pile of newspapers stood there. Shift yourself, Private Pulsifer, it barked, and it shuffled into the room. The newspapers fell to the floor, revealing Witchfinder Sergeant Shadwell, who coughed painfully and relit his cigarette, which had gone out. You want to watch him? He's one of them, he said. Who, sir? Take your ease, Private. Him. That little brown feller. Mr. So-called Rajit. Is them terrible foreign arts. The rubby squint-eyed little yellow god. Women with too many arms. Witches, the lot of them. He does give us the newspapers free, though. Sergeant, said Newt. And they're not too old. And voodoo. I bet he does voodoo. Sacrificing chickens to that Baron Saturday. You know, tall darky bugger in the top hat. Brings people back from the dead, aye, and makes them work on the Sabbath day. Voodoo. Shadwell sniffed speculatively. Newt tried to picture Shadwell's landlord as an exponent of voodoo. Certainly Mr. Rajit worked on the Sabbath. In fact, with his plump quiet wife and plump cheerful children, he worked around the clock. Never mind the calendar. Diligently filling the area's needs in the matter of soft drinks, white bread, tobacco, sweet newspapers, magazines, and the type of top-shelf pornography that made Newt's eyes water just to think about. The worst you could imagine Mr. Rajit doing with a chicken was selling it after the sell-by date. But Mr. Rajit's from Bangladesh or India or somewhere, he said. I thought voodoo came from the West Indies. Ah, said Witchfinder Sergeant Shadwell, and took another drag on his cigarette. Or appeared to. Newt had never actually quite seen one of his superior cigarettes. It was something to do with the way he cupped his hands. He never made the ends disappear when he'd finished with them. He even made the ends disappear when he'd finished with them. Ah. Well, doesn't it? Hidden wisdom, lad. Inner military secrets of the Witchfinder army. When you're all initiated proper, you'll know the secret truth. Some voodoo may come from the West Indies, I'll grant you that. Oh yes, I'll grant you that. But the worst kind, the darkest kind, that comes from, Bangladesh? Ugh. Yes, lad, that's it. Words right in me mouth. Bangladesh, exactly. Shadwell made the end of his cigarette vanish and managed furtively to roll another, never letting papers or tobacco be seen. So, you got anything, Witchfinder Private? Well, there's this. Newton held out the clipping. Shadwell squinted at it. Oh, them, he said. Load of rubbish. Called themselves bloody witches. I checked them out last year. Went down with me Armory of Righteousness and a packet of firelighters. Jimmied the place open. They were clean as a whistle. Mailed order beat jelly businesses they're trying to pep up. Load of rubbish. Wouldn't know a familiar spirit if it chewed out the bottoms of their trousers. Rubbish. It's not like it used to be, laddie. He sat down and poured himself a cup of sweet tea from a filthy thermos. Did I ever tell you how I was recruited to the army? He asked. Newt took this as his cue to sit down. He shook his head. Shadwell lit his roll-up with a battered Ronson lighter and coughed appreciatively. My cellmate, he was. Witchfinder Captain Fawkes. 10 years for arson. Burning a coven in Wimbledon. Wouldn't have gotten them all through if it wasn't the wrong day. Good fellow. Told me about the battle. The great war between heaven and hell. It was him that told me the inner secrets of the Witchfinder army. Familiar spirits, nipples, all that. Knew he was dying, you see. Got to have someone to carry on the tradition, like you is now. He shook his head. That's what we've been reduced to, lad, he said. A few 100 years ago, see, we was powerful. We stood between the world and the darkness. We was the thin red line. Thin red line of fire, you see. I thought the churches, Newt began. Pah, said Shadwell. Newt had seen the word in print, but this was the first time he'd ever heard anyone say it. Churches? What good did they ever do? Them just as bad. Same line of business, nearly. You can't trust them to stamp out the evil one, 'cause if they did, they'd be out of that line of business. If you're going up against a tiger, you don't want fellow travelers whose idea of hunting is to throw meat at it. Nay, lad, it's up to us against the darkness. Everything went quiet for a moment. Newt always tried to see the best in everyone, but it had occurred to him shortly after joining the WA that his superior and only fellow soldier was as well balanced as an upturned pyramid. Shortly, in this case, meant under 5 seconds. The WA's headquarters was a fetid room with walls the color of nicotine, which was almost certainly what they were coated with, and the floor the color of cigarette ash, which was almost certainly what it was. There was a small square of carpet. Newt avoided walking on it if possible because it sucked at his shoes. One of the walls had a yellowing map of the British Isles tacked to it, with homemade flags sticking in it here and there. Most of them were within a cheap day return fare of London. But Newt had stuck with it in the past few weeks because, well, horrified fascination had turned into horrified pity, and then a sort of horrified affection. Shadwell had turned out to be about 5 feet high and wore clothes which, no matter what they actually were, always turned up even in your short-term memory as an old Macintosh. The old man may have had all his own teeth, but only because no one else could possibly have wanted them. Just one of them, placed under the pillow, would have made the tooth fairy hand in its wand. He appeared to live entirely on sweet tea, condensed milk, hand-rolled cigarettes, and a sort of sullen internal energy. Shadwell had a cause, which he followed with the full resources of his soul and his pensioner's concessionary travel pass. He believed in it. It powered him like a turbine. Newton Pulsifer had never had a cause in his life, nor had he, as far as he knew, ever believed in anything. It had been embarrassing because he quite wanted to believe in something, since he recognized that belief was the life belt that got most people through the choppy waters of life. He'd have liked to believe in a supreme god, although he'd have preferred a half-hour's chat with him before committing himself to clear up 1 or 2 points. He'd sat in all sorts of churches waiting for that single flash of blue light, and it hadn't come. And then he tried to become an official atheist, and hadn't got the rock-hard, self-satisfied strength of belief even for that. And every single political party had seemed to him equally dishonest. And he'd given up on ecology when the ecology magazine he'd been subscribing to had shown its readers a plan of a self-sufficient garden, and had drawn the ecological goat tethered within 3 feet of the ecological beehive. Newt had spent a lot of time at his grandmother's house in the country and had thought he knew something about the habits of both goats and bees, and concluded that therefore that the magazine was run by a bunch of bio-overalled maniacs. Besides, it used the word community too often. Newt had always suspected that people who regularly used the word community were using it in a very specific sense that excluded him and everyone he knew. Then he'd tried believing in the universe, which seemed sound enough until he'd innocently started reading new books with words like chaos and time and quantum in the titles. He'd found that even the people whose job of work was, so to speak, the universe, didn't really believe in it and were actually quite proud of not knowing what it really was or even if it could theoretically exist. To Newt's straightforward mind, this was intolerable. Newt had not believed in the Cub Scouts, and then, when he was old enough, not in the Scouts either. He was prepared to believe, though, that the job of wages clerk at the United Holdings plc was possibly the most boring in the world. This is how Newton Pulsifer looked as a man. If he went into a phone booth and changed, he might manage to come out looking like Clark Kent. But he found he rather liked Shadwell. People often did, much to Shadwell's annoyance. The Rajids liked him because he always eventually paid his rent and didn't cause any trouble, and was racist in such a glowering, undirected way that it was quite inoffensive. It was simply that Shadwell hated everyone in the world, regardless of caste, color, or creed, and wasn't going to make any exceptions for anyone. Madame Tracy liked him. Newt had been amazed to find that the tenant of the other flat was a middle-aged, motherly soul whose gentleman callers called as much for a cup of tea and a nice chat as for what little discipline she was still able to exact. Sometimes, when he'd nursed a half-pint of Guinness on a Saturday night, Shadwell would stand in the corridor between their rooms and shout things like, "Whore of Babylon!" But she told Newt privately that she'd always felt rather gratified about this, even though the closest she'd been to Babylon was Torremolinos. It was like free advertising, she said. She said she didn't mind him banging on the wall and swearing during her seance afternoons either. Her knees had been giving her gip, and she wasn't always up to operating the table wrapper, she said, so a bit of muffled thumping came in useful. On Sundays, she'd leave him a bit of dinner on his doorstep with another plate over the top of it to keep it warm. You couldn't help liking Shadwell, she said. For all the good it did, though, she might as well be flicking bread pellets into a black hole. Newt remembered the other cuttings. He pushed them across the stained desk. "What are these?" said Shadwell suspiciously. "Phenomena," said Newt. "You said to look for phenomena. There's more phenomena than witches these days, I'm afraid." "Anyone been shooting hares with a silver bullet and next day an old crone in the village is walking with a limp?" Shadwell said hopefully. "I'm afraid not." "Any cows dropping dead after some woman has looked at them?" No." "What is it then?" said Shadwell. He shoveled the cross through the sticky brown cupboard and pulled out a tin of condensed milk. "Odd things happening," said Newt. He'd spent weeks on this. Shadwell had really let the papers piled up. Some of them went back for years. Newt had quite a good memory, perhaps because in his 26 years very little had happened to fill it up, and he had become quite expert on some very esoteric subjects. "Seems to be something new every day," said Newt, flicking through the rectangles of newsprint. "Something weird has been happening to nuclear power stations, and no one seems to know what it is. And some people are claiming that the lost continent of Atlantis has risen." He looked proud of his efforts.
Shadwell's penknife punctured the condensed milk tin. There was the distant sound of a telephone ringing. Both men instinctively ignored it. All the calls were from Madame Tracy anyway, and some of them were not intended for the ear of man. Newt had conscientiously answered the phone on his first day, listened carefully to the question, said, "Marks and Spencer's 100% cotton Y-fronts, actually," and had been left with a dead receiver. Shadwell sucked deeply. That's no proper phenomena," he said. "Can't see any witches doing that. They're more for the sinking of things, you can." Newt's mouth opened and shut a few times. "If we're strong in the fight against witchery, we can't afford to be sidetracked by this style of thing," Shadwell went on. "Haven't you got anything more witchcrafty?" "But American troops have landed on it to protect it from things," moaned Newt. "A non-existent continent." "Any witches on it?" said Shadwell, showing a spark of interest for the first time. "It doesn't say," said Newt. Then it's just politics and geography," said Shadwell dismissively. Madame Tracy poked her head around the corner. "Cooey, Mr. Shadwell," she said, giving Newt a friendly little wave. "A gentleman on the telephone for you." "Hello, Mr. Newton." Away with ye, you harlots," said Shadwell automatically. "He sounds ever so refined," said Madame Tracy, taking no notice. "And I'll be getting us a nice bit of liver for Sunday." "I'd sooner sup with the devil, woman." "So if you'd let me have the plates back from last week, it'd be a help. There's a love," said Madame Tracy, and tottered unsteadily back on 3-inch heels to her flat, and whatever it was that had been interrupted. Newt looked despondently at his cuttings as Shadwell went out, grumbling to the phone. There was one about the stones of Stonehenge moving out of position as though they were iron fillings in a magnetic field. He was vaguely aware of one side of a telephone conversation. "Who? Aye. You say? What class of thing would that be?" "Aye, just as you say, sir." "And where is this place, then?" But mysteriously moving stones wasn't Shadwell's cup of tea, or rather, tin of milk. Fine, Shadwell reassured the caller. "We'll get on right away. I'll put my best squad on it and report success to ye any minute. I have no doubt. Goodbye to you, sir, and bless you too, sir." There was the ting of a receiver going back on the hook, and then Shadwell's voice, no longer metaphorically crouched in deference, said, "Dear boy, you great southern pansy." Footnote saying, Shadwell hated all southerners and by inference was standing at the North Pole. Okay. He shuffled back into the room and then stared at Newt as he had forgotten why he was there. "What was it ye was going on about?" he said. "All these things that are happening," Newt began. "Aye," Shadwell continued to look through him while thoughtfully tapping the empty tin against his teeth. "Well, there's this little town which has been having some amazing weather for the last few years." Newt went on helplessly. "What? Raining frogs and similar?" said Shadwell, brightening up a bit. "No, it just has normal weather for the time of year." "Call that a phenomena?" said Shadwell. "I've seen phenomena that'll make your hair curl, laddie." He started tapping again. "When do you remember normal weather for the time of year?" said Newt, slightly annoyed. "Normal weather for the time of year isn't normal, Sergeant. It has snow at Christmas. When did you last see snow at Christmas? And long hot Augusts every year? And crisp autumns? The kind of weather you used to dream of as a kid? It never rained on November the 5th and always snowed on Christmas Eve?" Shadwell's eyes looked unfocused. He paused with the condensed milk tin halfway to his lips. "I never used to dream when I was a kid," he said quietly. Newt was aware of skidding around the lip of some deep, unpleasant pit. He mentally backed away. "It's just very odd," he said. "There's a weather woman here talking about averages and norms and microclimates and things and like that." "What does that mean?" said Shadwell. "Means he doesn't know why," said Newt. Who hadn't spent years on the littoral of business without picking up a thing or two? He looked sidelong at the Witchfinder sergeant. Witches are well known for affecting the weather, he prompted. I looked it up in the Discovery. Oh God, he thought, or other suitable entity. Don't let me spend another evening cutting newspapers to bits in this ashtray of a room. Let me get out in the fresh air. Let me do whatever it is the EA's equivalent of going water skiing in Germany. It's only 40 miles away, he said tentatively. I thought I could just sort of nip over there tomorrow and have a look around, you know. I'll pay my own petrol, he added. Shadwell wiped his upper lip thoughtfully. This place, he said, it wouldn't be called Tadfield, would it? That's right, Mr. Shadfield, said Nude. How did you know that? Wonder what the Southerners is playing at now, said Shadwell under his breath. Well, he said out loud. And why not? Who'll be playing, Sergeant? Said Newt. Shadwell ignored him. Aye, I suppose it can't do any harm. You'll pay your own petrol, you say? Newt nodded. Then you'll come here at 9 o'clock in the morning, he said, before you go. What for? Said Newt. Your armor righteousness. Let me have a little drink. Reading what Shadwell is saying is difficult because it's written with an accent. I don't like it when they write it with an accent. It trips me up real bad. Especially like a jumble of mysterious English accents, apparently. Just after Newt had left, the phone rang again. This time it was Crowley, who gave approximately the same instructions as Aziraphale. Shadwell took them down again for form's sake, while Madame Tracy hovered delightedly behind him. Hold on, I'm gonna back up a bit. So wait, they both said they had somebody, like a network of people, to look into things for them. And it turns out they're both the same guy. Just one dude. Alright then. Just after Newt had left, the phone rang again. This time it was Crowley, who gave approximately the same instructions as Aziraphale. Shadwell took them down again for form's sake, while Madame Tracy hovered delightedly behind them. 2 calls in one day, Mr. Shadwell, she said. Your little army must be marching away like anything. Ah, away with ye, you murdering plushed Berzine, muttered Shadwell, and, slammed the door. Tadfield, he thought. Ah, well, so long as they paid up on time. Neither Aziraphale or Crowley ran the Witchfinder army, but they both approved of it, or at least knew that it would be approved of by their superiors. So it appeared on the list of Aziraphale's agencies because it was, well, a Witchfinder army, and you had to support anyone calling themselves Witchfinders in the same way that the USA had to support anyone calling them anti-communist. And it appeared on Crowley's list for the slightly more sophisticated reason that people like Shadwell did the cause of hell no harm at all. Quite the reverse, it was felt. Strictly speaking, Shadwell didn't run the WEA either. According to Shadwell's pay ledgers, it was run by Witchfinder General Smith. Under him were Witchfinder Colonels Green and Jones, and Witchfinder Majors Jackson, Robinson, and Smith. No relation. Then there were Witchfinder Majors Saucepan, Tin, Milk, and Cupboard, because Shadwell's limited imagination had been beginning to struggle at this point. And Witchfinder Captains Smith, and Smythe, and ditto. And 500 Witchfinder privates and corporals and sergeants. Many of them were called Smith. But this didn't matter because neither Crowley nor Aziraphale had ever bothered to read that far. They simply handed over the pay. After all, both lots put together only came to around £60 a year. Shadwell didn't consider this in any way criminal. The army was a sacred trust, and the man had to do something. The old 9 pences weren't coming in like they used to. End of chapter. Big old stretcheroo. Ooh, my throat. I think my mouth is sufficiently dry and my throat is sufficiently worn out that I shouldn't be reading any further today. We've read two major chapters, and I suppose that will be enough. Yeah. I think gotta rest my voice, yeah. And my body, and my soul, and my mind. And I would suppose that this would be just about it for today's stream. Because I am tired, and I started out late anyway. And I should eat more soup, I will do. And maybe something else. We will see. So, that's it for this week, I suppose. Next week, I shall make a new schedule, of course. It will not look substantially different from last week's schedule. We will bring back System Shock. We will read the same book, play the same games, and maybe finally find a game to collab with Minnie. Otherwise, it will be just about the same thing as last time. Which is fine by me. Big yawn. Big yawn. What do we do now? Yeah. Let me just scoot all my windows back into their proper positions, because I always have to arrange them when I'm reading. Put my normal music back on, and we figure out where we go. Goodbye. Yeah, this book is really fun, but there's like a lot going on. There's like so much different things happening at the same time, isn't it? I think currently I'm most enjoying the Council of Babbies discussing their discoveries. It's pretty funny. It's great. I'm worried what's gonna happen to the world once Adam goes to sleep with thoughts of the hollow earth in his mind. The whole world is just gonna collapse in on itself or something. But yeah, so tomorrow we'll be playing some Tyranny. Tyranny is really interesting. The setting is really cool. We didn't really get very far in it. We just barely finished the tutorial and just like kind of the first couple of missions. Maybe I should go for the route of Pathfinder and not read out loud every single line though, because reading the book and then immediately going to Tyranny is gonna be a bit rough on me, so I might just chill. Tomorrow. But yeah, Tyranny, tomorrow. We will be a bad guy, an evil guy. Somewhat rude to people, because I can't do much more than that in video games, apparently. Unless I choke him out and kill him. That is apparently not beyond my morals. Anyway, let us raid Gao, who's working on his game. He's doing his game. And I shall rest, my hero Throat. You did good, Throat. You did good. You said the words. You read the lines. See you tomorrow, everybody. Thanks for being here and listening to my reading. I will... I gotta keep going and doing things, yeah. Let's all tell Gao how cool and awesome he is. Yeah.
Toot toot. Todororot. Dot. Bye bye.